With the flow.
Started? Yeah.
So, a very good evening to all of you. Thank you, esteemed panelists, for joining us for this enriching conversation on Rediscover the Diva in You. Essentially for, an insightful conversation towards throwing more light on opportunities for returning career women and in times which is perceived as adversities, do we really have a silver lining to the cloud when it comes to hiring women and getting them back to the workforce? So with us on the panel we have Neerja Ganesh. She's the Director Relationships of National Education Society of Karnataka. Neerja, can we have a few words from you, please?
Sure. Thank you, Harsh and Deepika for having me on this panel. This is something that I'm extremely passionate about. I talk a lot. I have also held the position of heading the Jobs for Her Foundation for about 18 months prior to coming on to taking on this role. And the only reason I moved out from Jobs for Her Foundation to take on this role was because I also wanted to address a lot of students. So women always, I have a soft corner towards helping women grow in their careers and realize their potential. But I thought that we must also catch them young. So let's start looking at the students also. And if I go a little more back, then I have 25 years of experience in the IT field. My last corporate stint was with Capgemini. And today, while I have this day job at National Education Society of Karnataka, the role is basically to build the industry academia connect so that we can have the curriculum, which is essentially what the industry is looking at, which we from the academia really will not be able to understand unless and until the industry comes and talks to us and says, okay, these are the skills that we want for today. So that's my role, to build that connect and review curriculum and add on skill building courses, multidisciplinary courses. The second part of it, which has now suddenly gotten highlighted, is the online education. That's my day job, beyond which I do a lot of freelance work, especially in the gender space, and do a lot of trainings and workshops around leadership development. Personally, I am married. I have a daughter who's just finished her 12th standard. I can say just finished because the last exam got over 2 weeks ago. And but she's also gotten admission in Christ University. We did everything online, so that way we are relieved. So that's me.
Thank you so much. It's really an honor having you on the panel, Neerja. And I think the space that you're in currently of impacting them young is something which is really the need of the hour. So thanks for joining us. Next we have on the panel is Nandini Sarkar. She is Global Equity, Diversity and Inclusion Leader in Boeing India. Nandini, a few words about yourself, please.
Thank you, Deepika and Harsh, for having me as part of Corporate Diva Signature Program. As you already know my name, let me start off with a little different thing that I do beyond what I do as per my role. So I missed my calling as a chef. And what I don't miss today is cooking up a delectable palate when it comes to making a workforce mix. So I've been very fortunate working at cross industries like IT, ITES services, manufacturing, telecom, hospitality, and now aerospace. What I do currently is I work with the diversity dimensions of gender, generation, culture, veterans, disability, LGBTQIA+, and more close to my heart is how to create an underpinning of intersectionality, because that's where the challenge of building inclusion comes. So by passion, I'm an inclusion strategist, an influencer, and an activist at heart. I'm associated with citizens movement like No Rape India. I'm associated with cross-industry bodies like CII and get called for many other programs for women empowerment and equity, like in case of UN Global Network, Compact Network India. And what I like doing, my passion is reading, listening to music, and talking to my plants. Thank you, Deepika.
Lovely, lovely. I think the last one was just so beautiful, talking to your plants. We did have a conversation recently on that. So that's beautiful. Thank you for joining us, Nandini. And I think the whole perspective and the whole initiation of developing women, be it returning career or be it women in leadership or be in the overall growth, holistic growth of women at the workforce is incomplete if we don't involve both genders and have discussions and perceptions coming from both genders, which is why I'm extremely grateful for Manish Chum, is the Head Talent and Performance Learning COE Whirlpool Asia. Thank you so much, Manish, for joining us, and would love to hear a few words about yourself as well.
Thanks, Deepika and Harsh, for having me here in this panel discussion. A quick introduction about myself. I have about close to 17 years of work ex, predominantly in the corporate industry space. So I've worked with, in fact, I've traveled pretty much in every city in India, worked there, barring the eastern city, which is Calcutta. So Hyderabad, Chennai, and the west and the north part of it I've pretty much covered. So, uh, uh, and I've worked in different industries like FMCD, telecom, IT, ITS, consulting. Have handled multiple roles and within HR domain itself across the geographies, and that's where it exposed me to a very unique experience of diversity, which was not gender-based diversity, but a cultural-based diversity. And my interest about in the topic of diversity actually started with cultural diversity. Then it bit a dovetailed into a gender-based diversity, and then other forms of diversity, what we generally talk about in the corporate sector. And that leads me to a very active interest in understanding the impact of different cultures in the work environment, on the group dynamics in that sense. And I proudly call myself as a student of change. I've pursued dedicated studies in organization and behavior change, which we typically call as organization development in the last couple of years. And uh, my active interest is I am associated with a lot of social organization, which are technically non-profit, and also a few of the political organizations, because I think if we have to make any meaningful change, we have to have ownership and partnership with different forms of organizations and players in the society. So that's about a quick introduction about myself. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Manish. Really, really privileged to have you join the panel for us. And dear panelists, the panel discussion is going to be moderated by Harsh Jory. He's an executive leadership coach. Harsh, a few lines about yourself.
Yeah, thanks. First of all, a very warm welcome to everybody, panelists and all the participants of the DIVA Restart. And I thank you all for joining, taking time off on Saturday evening, really. So I primarily work as an executive leadership coach with a special focus on women leadership development. I've had about 25 years of work experience in different industries. I've been a sailor for about 18 years, sailed on ships, and ship's captain. Then I worked into investment banking, spent about 9 years with Goldman Sachs. And now this is my third stint. So like Manish, I'm also a student of change and I live change. Yeah, that's really probably in brief.
Wonderful joining hands with you to put forth the bootcamp as well as the panel discussion on such an enriching topic. And here's your moderator, myself as well, Deepika Trehan. I'm the founder of the Health of Women Forum and a women leadership development platform called Corporate DIVA. Coming from the armed forces, diversity and inclusion really runs in my DNA. And during the course of life, I've kind of pretty much witnessed the entire life cycle of a woman professional, right from being a very aspirational, a woman professional, to going on sabbatical, to finding and returning back to work and finally making a comeback through my entrepreneurial journey. So it's been a journey, which is why I'm so passionate about women and how we can develop and see more and more women in senior leadership and in various spheres of life. So thank you so much. With that, we get started on this very interesting topic on women and their career returnship, their return to work, possibilities, probabilities, and so much more. I'd like to start with Neerja. Neerja, we're in a scenario which is slowly becoming the norm, but this current norm just caught us all unaware. What do you think of the current scenario, more from the terms of it being, say, an adverse times of adversity or an opportunity? What is it that we have to look forward to?
So if you kind of follow me and the kind of stuff that I write and speak, one of the statements that I always say is that treat every interaction as an opportunity. And of course, there's someone who has said that don't let a bad crisis go away, right? So for me, I won't say I'm an optimist, I'm a realist. So we do understand that there are challenges, there are issues. But the point is that there is an opportunity in everything. And that's the mindset that I've had throughout. And I've had ups and downs in my careers, and I have seen others who've had ups and downs in their careers. That is the way it is. Recently I was also having a conversation with somebody else who said that there's always going to be an S curve in one's career, where you kind of go up, and then you reach that point of the S where either you retire, you quit, or you plateau and you say, okay, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life, or you kind of build another S, which means that you will take a dip but then go up. So for me, I always look at everything as an opportunity, and I think the current situation is also an opportunity.
Nandini, what is your call on the current times?
So I would just dwell on what Nirja said and take it a little further ahead. My opening statement here would be necessity over practicality, because our practical minds would speak something, whereas necessity is something. And to just justify why I'm saying that, India has become the second largest manufacturer of PPE currently, which means we've actually used this position and situation as an opportunity. So from there on, my first take of this current situation is that we've realized as individuals, as part of a community of family and the larger society, that we need to be economically productive, because we know as an aftermath of COVID situation, there has been a lot of pay cuts, job losses, furloughs, and things like that. So being economically productive, if there is talent, and which I'm sure resides in every one of us, we need to be economically productive. The second thing is flexibility, and virtual workplace has become an in thing. We've realized that there is nothing called face time. Flex time matters as long as things are delivered with due diligence, with quality, excellence, and productivity well measured. Gender parity starts with me in my home. That has become a reality today, because we know the male counterparts of ours at home have supported many of us in running the show. So gender parity is a conversation point or context that we can all use as a way to negotiate and influence our ways through in order to make a comeback. The other would be talent has no boundaries today, because if we are working in the virtual work environment, then talent can access and do the necessary job according to the statement of work from anywhere in the geographical map. And then we will definitely need to have a different connotation to how we measure performance and have those conversations. So these are my take of the current situation.
Very insightful takes that we all should and must ponder over. And Manish, coming to you, Nandini highlighted the point of gender parity begins at home. And we were offline just talking about, how does your weekend happen? And you said groceries are a part of your weekend and all of that. How do you kind of look at the current situation?
So definitely it's a new leveler. In my more than a 1.5 decade of WorkX, Deepika, I haven't seen this kind of shift happening so soon, so fast, and so deep. Even in 2008, it happened, and then it was in a different nature, but it didn't went into our changing of habits. The way we live, the way we deal with people within the family, outside the family. So the depth and the breadth of this change is so deep. and it happened so fast. I mean, pretty much in a span of a week. So the stage of shock is getting over, and now we are getting into an adaptation stage. So we have now started accepting a face mask as a new accessory, like a mobile phone. We have started matching the prints on the face mask with our clothes pattern. So these are the new behaviors what we are getting into. And as Nija suggested, that we cannot let any crisis go waste. So, but the question is, very interestingly, somebody told me that, Manish, I think we all are in the same storm, but definitely we are in the different boats. So, it is each one of us in a very different capacities are dealing with change. So if you ask me, there is no one common standard experiential thing which I can say which is applicable to all, barring the fact that everybody is anxious, everybody is furious, at times everybody is, or a lot of people are apprehensive. So these emotions are running in. I think from a corporate perspective and from the organization perspective, it has reset a lot of definitions. In for, let's say, the way we look at our careers, the way we look at our growth in the organization, the way we look at our development. And I think the major shift what has happened is we have started looking at the relationship between us as an employee and our employer. The concepts like job security and income security are now getting delinked. You might have a job, but you may not have an income, or you might still have an income, but may not be a job. So I think these are the things which are coming so prominently out. I think it's an exciting time for any person who wants to understand change. But I think specifically from and since that is one of the main theme of this discussion, on the diversity part of it, on the inclusion part of it, I think again those definitions are up for change. Depends on us as how much deep we want to go into it. For example, when we talk about hostile environment, toxicity in workplace, technically there is no workplace now, right? So how will we define that? All those concepts of glass ceiling, in the virtual environment, how will we experience that? So I think those are the definitions which are up for change, and I think the more discussion, more debate is required in those fronts. And I think very progressive organizations are looking forward to these trends and are institutionalizing some of those changes very proactively. So interesting space all in all, and I think lot of things are on offer. Exciting times, I must say.
Absolutely. So you mentioned, there's change, there is excitement, there is defining and redefining certain definitions and certain facts. But, there is also confusion, especially in terms of women returning back to the workplace, right? And we'll start with you, Manish. What I want to understand here is that for women to get back to work before COVID itself was a challenge. How does that challenge continue to be, or do you think times have, or COVID times have made a slightly positive impact in terms of the challenging, reducing to these women who are now looking at returning to work, given that work from home opportunities will be up for grabs by various organizations?
Yeah. So the very important question, Deepika, and how I would like to answer is, I had an interestingly very unique distinction of being the only inclusion and diversity regional lead in Whirlpool. Rest of it, everybody was a female and I was the only male in that sense. So I can share a lot of those experiences. I think getting women back to work has always been a challenge as well as opportunity for the organizations, and for the people as well. Why a challenge? Because it doesn't fit into a norm of somebody who's already working, and it's more of a lift and shift of a candidate. You are explaining your experiences which fits into a particular environment, and you are hired. But so this is always a challenge. But the opportunity is that you are getting somebody quicker on board. Person has already went through a learning experience. And very importantly, that person who have taken the break because of certain life events have already passed through those life events, right? So that person is already settled in the personal space, and it's a refreshing break, and the person wants to come back. So it has always been an opportunity as well as challenge, pre-COVID, post-COVID, and it's going to be like that. What has happened is that because of COVID, the it has put a bit of a pressure on the hiring requirements, which was actually the engine for getting people back to work. So that has gone to a screeching halt. And what we see in the corporate space is that there are lesser opportunities. And I firmly believe that this tide will also pass through, because if you look at the newspapers, FMCG companies are back on track to the pre-COVID production levels. FMCG, my sector, is slowly crawling back to the pre-COVID levels, and if manufacturing areas are lifted, I think this journey will be much more faster. So what is important is that once this hiring engine starts humming back, because of the whatever this restriction goes away, organizations are not doing away with their diversity agenda. Any organization which has taken already this pursuit have not abandoned that. While you may not have any hiring numbers seen in the market, there are already efforts which are going on to preserve that inclusion agenda, because inclusion is much wider term which talks about culture change, inclusive mindsets, and gender is again one of the manifestations of that. So that work is already happening in most of the organizations which have already pursued this. Once it comes back to normal economic activity, I think what you will see is a recruitment starting, and then things coming back on track. So my only piece of offering here to all the participants is that don't lose sight of because of the speed breaker, because the fundamentals have not got distorted. Organizations won't say that after pre-COVID we don't want diversity talent. Organization won't say that no, I don't believe in inclusion, I don't believe in diversity or any other agenda. It's a more of a change what has happened, uninvited, unforeseen change. Once it comes back, what is more important is that in this scenario, how to increase the probability by riding on this wave. I think that's what the catchment area is for any candidate looking to come back to work. How to leverage this tide, so how to focus on skills, and we'll talk more about it as we move forward into this discussion. But overall, Deepika, that's what my thought is, in terms of how to look at this scenario.
Agreed. I think some very, very profound pointers over there in terms of returnship and diversity and inclusion still being a top agenda for organizations. Neerja, this is a question for you. When we're looking at women returning back to work, and a lot of times, they don't have a preset set of instructions or a fallback guide or something like that, which kind of enables them to understand what is the kind of preparation that they need to return to work. So we'd like to know, since you worked so deeply with returning career women, what is it, and coming from a corporate background and the work that you do today, what do you think when we're looking at returning career women's corporate readiness, how should they prepare themselves?
Yeah, so one of the things that I have mainly observed, and I don't know if this cohort also kind of fits into that, but most of the time, women who consciously take a break. I mean, there are others who are just forced to take because of certain circumstances, but the ones who consciously take a break, maybe because of maternity and then they want to be with the child for 1 year, 2 years. So they have a timeline in mind to say, I will get back after a year. But what happens is they will wait for that 1 year, and then after the birthday gets celebrated is when they say, okay, now I have to get back. Because there is something which is telling them, I took a break for a year and now I have to get back. So there is no preparation that has happened. While we may talk about upskilling, reskilling and all of that, I will keep that aside. There is a lot of preparation that one has to do mentally and, at home in the personal space to believe that she can get back. And I'm not even talking about confidence and all of that. Because you have been at home for a year and there has been a pattern, there has been a routine, there may be a discipline that you have been following, which you again need some time to change and to fall back into a routine that will work when you start going to work. Whether you work from home, whether you work outside, part-time, full-time, doesn't matter. That is the biggest preparation that one needs to do. So what I advise these women who kind of taken that 2 years and then they say, okay, now the 2 years is over, is that you assume that you are already at work, and which means if it is a part-time job that you want to do, and if it is 4 hours, you actually assume that you are away from, from your household duties for those 4 hours. With that assumption, start putting a routine in place. That will tell you whether this is going to work or not. It could be, that, yeah, and the usual thing that the women do, there's cooking and there's, the baby to be looked after, or somebody to be cared for. Are you going to get external help, or are you going to do some previous night and, manage the kitchen or whatever that is? Try to put that routine in place. It will tell you what works, what does not work. Otherwise, the minute you land the job, it is not going to be an easy thing, and there is a risk of you again thinking of taking a break because this is not working out for you. Okay, so that's the first piece of advice I give everyone. And then when you have taken off those 4 hours, you've still not got a job, but you've taken off the 4 hours, you built a routine around, those is when you can now start investing time on, learning and, attending conferences. Today, everything is virtual, and that's the biggest opportunity. You don't even have to step out of your house to go to anything. I'm in Bangalore, most of us are in Bangalore, I guess. The traffic is not going to, bother you other than, the network traffic. And you are suddenly open to attending, conferences which are happening across the globe. The kind of speakers that you have always wished to hear and, content that you wanted to kind of listen to is available right there. So use those 4 hours, 8 hours to do that self-development and everything else, which is the second preparation that you do. So the reskilling, upskilling will happen after you've set in your routine and discipline. That's something that I will tell all the women who are wanting to get back to work. But even for others who are starting work, and this is something I observed very closely at home with my daughter. I said that she's just finished at 12, but she landed an internship and she picked it up. So she's kind of the one who will grab every opportunity. So she had the 1-month internship at an organization called Aspire for her, and she did well. So they've kind of, made her a core team member. And what I'm seeing is now they have all the time in the world, and this is the first job, extremely passionate, extremely interested, and there is no boundaries, nobody's asking you for anything, 24/7 you're working. So one of the things that I tell people is put your calendar up front, whether it is starting, restarting, rising, for all of us, man, woman, whoever. Ensure that you have a calendar forever. Whether you're working or not doesn't matter. It has to be calendarized, your personal, professional priorities, your me time, whatever, and ensure that it is there in your daily, weekly, monthly calendar so that it doesn't stress you out and you don't suddenly start feeling stifled. I got back to work and now, these are all the things that I want to compromise. Then those questions of work-life balance and everything else will emerge. So a couple of, advices for me for starting off is this, or restarting is this.
Yes, I think that was so, insightful, Neerja, especially the calendar part of it, because that's where a lot of us land up in a mess where we've not categorized our me time also has to be a part of the calendar, it's essential. So thank you for that.
And it's not hard, let me tell you, because I put this into my daughter's head right now, because I know that this is how they will get into a workaholic mode, and it will still be okay when she graduates and goes into a regular corporate job or whatever, and then the marriage and the kids will happen, and then everything is going to. So if you started this way, and it's never too late to start, and I told her, put your lunch time, and this is vacation, so please prioritize some TV time also. Imagine a mother saying go watch TV, because I'm seeing that she's just not wanting to come out of the work. The work is interesting, but it will have that
calendarizing is important, absolutely.
Yeah,
so my next question before I pass the baton on to Harsh is to Nandini, is that Nandini, we just heard about the preparation that women looking for returnship need to kind of invest into, and the preparedness for that. But you being a D&I senior leader, what do you think should be a few things that organizations should be doing to welcome women and returning career women?
So I'll kind of try and respond to that in a two-pronged approach. the first part of your question with respect to what should organizations be doing, well, that's where the importance of equity, diversity, and inclusion seeps in, because we may not have a physical workplace today, but working in a virtual workplace means we need to continue to hear and listen to the sentiments of our people, which is very crucial, because when you seek, you invite speaking, and when you invite speaking, you need to listen. And when you listen, that listening needs to be an active listening, because without that, you wouldn't know what is going on in the minds of the people. So, equity, diversity, and inclusion looks into that aspect. Second aspect that we are trying to, as D&I practitioners, look into within the organizational environment is to attack those spaces where we see bias, prejudice, and stereotypes. And that in a dovetail effect would really enable talents to be invited from every buckets of our talent spectrum to be part of the organizational environment. Now, we would also look into reassessing the policies that we have. There was a time when HR policies were brought to the fore, and that identified how open, how respectful, and safe is the environment of the organization. Then it kind of moved and rather transitioned into women-friendly work policies. But today, in the COVID situation and the post-COVID era, we would need to look into gender-neutral policies which will be women-friendly. So there's a lot of changes, transitions that are taking place. So at the heart of everything is building that sense of belonging and connectedness. And as I said, opening up the mindsets by clearing it off from bias, stereotype, and prejudice would really enable us to look into the talent pool, which we are saying are in hiatus and needs to come back to the mainstream. Now, from the other aspect, the second approach that I would say is from the side of the talent, because we know the talent spectrum is now open, because work location does not define whether you could apply or not apply for a certain position. Having said that, dwell into the privileges that you are in. We know if we read into the statistics of education, be it in the school level, in the secondary and the higher secondary level, be it in the tech level, we see a diminishing ratio of women, rather the girl students to that of the male students, which means we are already privileged because we have acquired that knowledge in terms of academic qualification. And what we are acquiring today, if we've taken a sabbatical or a break, is life skills. So when we try and define that gap, it is the life skills that we've acquired, and it only happens when we transition to the phases of life. So life skills is the bridging gap between where you had left your previous job or association with a job. But today I see a huge plethora of opportunities waiting in the e-commerce sector and also in the gig economy. So that would be my response in a two-pronged approach.
So Deepika, I have a comment to make, just to add on, Nandini's point. I think in these times, these are those times when it is very important to even state the very obvious thing, and preserving the inclusion and diversity agenda is one of those, to your question of what organizations should do, what I've always felt is that reiterating by the leadership that this agenda is important for us goes in a long way in communicating that sentiment across the hierarchies that yes, our priorities have shifted, but our intent has not. And it is very important to articulate that thing far more importantly in current times than any other times. I think that is the one thing. Secondly, the organization also have to be a bit innovative that, okay, yeah, because of the budget constraints, they may not have an opportunity to go with those programs and getting, making those number specific hirings done to increase the representation within the organization. So I think it is incumbent on the learning teams or the facilitation teams to be innovative in how to preserve this agenda, because there's already a cost pressure which is going in there. So I think these two are very important, and I think what I typically call as sharpening the saw, and this is the time when we have to do that. We always and when we talked about the talent aspect, we always believe that, okay, if there is a gap in the succession or there is a leadership pipeline, diversity pipeline which needs to be built, they used to hire them. Now you cannot hire them. You have to keep it outside the organization, identify them. When the tide gets over, just get them on board. So, if you ask me any thought through organization, or people teams or strategy teams, I think there's a lot of work still to do, and leverage these times rather than just go it away.
Absolutely, Manish. I think very well put across. Glad that you got that perspective forward as well. On that note, I'm going to pass the moderator baton on to Harsh, and Harsh would take forward the panel.
Thanks. So Manish, you mentioned an interesting point, right? For a lot of organizations, success is still about survival, right? For next couple of months, right? And there will be cost pressures and all. And Nandini, you mentioned gig economy and potential opportunities. So do you see a realignment of workforce between, let's say, permanent versus flexi workers, permanent versus part-time, just to accommodate that cost pressure and also ensure more opportunities are available? What is your opinion in terms of the composition of workforce being changed over the next 3, 6, 12 months? Considering more people can now work from home, right? Who were not necessarily part of the permanent workforce earlier, right? What are your thoughts around that? Maybe Manish will start with you.
Sure. So you see, when we talk about workforce models per se, right? I think this work from home is something which in a lot of organization was already happening, but yeah, at a very minuscule level. For example, IT sector is not a new to work from home. There are a lot of organizations in IT, ITES space who have already been working from work from home. The space was minuscule. In brick and mortar companies, manufacturing companies, again, it was not happening to that scale. It was more happening at the corporate functions level. But again, it was happening in a here and a bit there. This has led to a huge, a different template of working, which is work from home. So it is going to continue where, to answer your question, there are few new models of working which are coming in, like for example, alternate work arrangement, which means that you may not have 5-day job. You might have 3-day job. You can still work, so your weekend will not be 2 days, it will be 3 days or 4 days. And accordingly, you take a pay cut, so organization is ensuring a job security, but organization cannot commit the income security, so that's one other example. Another one is that, and right now, that option cannot sustain, but it is definitely on paper that, you may not be in a full-time employment with the organization, but, you can be, a kind of a consultant. You can work with a fixed tenure. You will not be part of performance management. You will not be part of incentive structure, but you can continue to provide your services. And that's what is actually a gig economy, which people are getting into, So there are a lot of, areas wherein you can be an individual contributor, but outside the organization, right? So if you ask me, this opens a lot of opportunities for diversified workforce, because earlier what was happening is you're getting diverse workforce, be it in terms of LGBTQ space or be it in a diversity space, into one template of a workforce, which is full-time workforce. And of course, so your funnel is like this. You are pushing more people, different types of people in one gate only. Now there are so many gates available. So you get much more opportunity to actually expand your diversified workforce in different template of employment. So that's a good thing which has happened actually.
It's a great point. You're seeing new opportunities, new templates of workplace models being created. As an extension to that question, Nisha, to you specifically, you have been associated with jobs for her for long now. Do you think there are certain industries, certain sectors which probably are more opportune for women to consider when they're thinking of returnship, considering these new workplace models potentially now opening up? Do you think women can target certain very specific areas which you think might be more suitable, or now potentially, there are more opportunities available?
First of all, I would like the movement to think about whether it is just getting a job or whether it's looking at a long-term career. And this is another point that I emphasize every time I speak to somebody, especially for someone who's returning, back from a break. Because many a times it is okay, let me just get into something because I have to get into something. The break has to finish, right? And it may not necessarily be looking at an intentional career, or maybe not yet. Maybe going forward, it could definitely. But if it is just, let me keep myself occupied for a few hours, be productive, and then slowly, move into a full-time and, long career view, and that's one kind of, view that one has to have. The second is, no, I have had enough. I have taken my break. I've taken care of all the responsibilities, as Nandini and Manish said. So now I'm ready to kind of do a full-time. That's the second kind of a career that we're looking at. For those who are very, very clear about a long-term career, they know that this is what I did in the past, this is where I want to go, that clarity is there. Some people also want to make a shift. They're not sure whether they want to go back to what they were doing prior to the break. If that clarity is there, I would also then recommend that they look at all these returnship programs that are offered by major corporates, where they really launch it with some kind of an event where the candidates are actually sensitized, and the candidates can acknowledge what the organization is all about and what are the kind of diversity policies and inclusion policies that we have. So it is important for the candidate to understand that upfront, and then they can figure out which particular sector and company. But if the thought process, let me just quickly get into a job, then I think the kinds of roles around the digital marketing, the content, writing, those kinds of roles are something that they can easily get into, even when they are during the break. And that's what I would really encourage. That while you should keep in touch, and you must keep in touch with 2 or 3 things. One is you must keep in touch with learning. Not necessarily sitting and doing courses, but keep learning on a daily basis. There's enough bite-sized information and content available today. For example, this panel itself is, learning. The ones who will attend and listen to this, there's immense learning that's coming out of it. So keep in touch with learning. Second is keep in touch with your networks. Don't let them go. Keep building your, networks and, continue to grow. And the third is, if you can, then spend a couple of hours. It may not necessarily be for a job. It could be just, if I say content, then you could just start blogging. And that becomes a good repository for you to show whenever you want to get into a content writing kind of a job, to say that this is the way I write. So that's, I, at the moment, am unaware of which industries are hiring or not hiring, but I have definitely seen the trend that for those women who are very, very clear about a long-term career, they should look at all these returnships that are coming from major corporates. And the reason I'm telling that is only for those women is because these companies are also investing in you. Please remember that. So don't, if you have no intention of a long-term career right now, you want to do a few hours, you go, you apply, you may even land the job, and then it becomes a bit of a issue, both because the organization is investing in a lot of training for you. They offer buddies, they offer mentors, and you also have a responsibility to kind of contribute in that way. So that's the way I look at the two scenarios. Other than that, specific industries, not very into it at the moment. One I heard was shipping, pharma, kind of industries are definitely hiring. Some of those companies have actually opened up many more positions than what it was before COVID hit us. So that research also one can possibly do it.
Thanks. And Nandi, anything from your side, your discussions at your peer level in the industry, what are you hearing?
So basically, hybrid working model is here to stay. And if I recall my experiences in terms of drafting flexible work arrangement policies for organizations that I have worked into, every bit of flexible working, be it working from a remote location, be it working from a location, which is outside the base location, be it part-time, be it on a project basis and things like that. And Manish talked about 3 days working and 4 days working have been spelled out. we did not see people pulling that to utilize that. But now is the time it will be utilized. And this gives the opportunity for those who are returning and wanting to make a long-term career to seize the opportunity. So my typical way of saying what could be the best way to look at from a candidate or a talent perspective would be, since it's a corporate diva program, so I would want to go with the word aura. And aura to me is an acronym which I'll explain in a bit. So aura for me is to ability to assess or anticipate. U stands for understand, R stands for respond, and A stands for adapt. And the underpinning of each of it would be curiosity. Because each one of us is the biggest and the most important character in our life's journey. We have to seize the opportunity, be it LinkedIn, be it the other job portals that we have. Go and assess the roles that are opening up even now. See what are the skill sets that you have. Map your skill sets in terms of the academic qualification that you bring, the previous experience, plus the life skills that you've acquired. And then also be open to diversify your job portfolio, or maybe even do a career transition. But assess your need, your intent to get back to work, and I'm sure you'll see the light. So that's my thought.
That's an interesting point. Be open to new opportunities, diversify, even be open to making a career transition. I mean, nature, you mentioned about job versus career, and I strongly believe that your first job may not necessarily be your last job. Like sometimes people become very picky and choosy that I want this and I want this, and only when all my conditions will be met is when I'm going to work, which normally does not happen, right? So sometimes it's also important to see, okay, this is the opportunity right now. It does not mean I'm going to just stay here. If I do well and if I grow, I will obviously progress in my career. Right? So that's a great point. One question which came in our previous boot camps and we wanted to address was that as and when the hiring engine starts sort of kick-starting and the hiring process starts and when recruitment starts on a more full-time basis, the challenge still remains is that there is a perception or a bias towards this whole career break, and there were participants who actually said that we have experienced that when we apply for job, we reach the interview stage, in some direct or indirect ways, we get this message, right, saying we are not hiring you because of this break. So, and they feel it's a strong bias, right? So, one is, where do you think this bias originates from, and how should women actually address this from there? So, what should they do, really? So, maybe Manish, from your side, do you think there is any truth in this bias, and why does it exist, if at all?
So absolutely. I would say yes. There is kind of a bias, and there is a logical reason to it. Whenever you are looking at a position, you are looking at the best guy or the person for that role. Okay, so you are basically looking at fitment. Okay, now the person who has handled that job in depth, in breadth, and there is a recency factor as well. Obviously the scale will tilt towards that person. If there is a gap, that gap is open to interpretation in terms of fitment. That's why people develop a cold feet that whether I should have somebody who's already doing that role, ready pretty much 70%, 60% of that role, understands the cultural dynamics, the cost of assimilation or the time for assimilation into new role would be minimal, and I need the person, hitting the ground running. Obviously the scale will tilt towards that person, and whenever there is a gap, people tend to think, okay, not less of, and what I've experienced is that it's not that people look at gap as a standalone aspect. There is a parallel question also running into minds that, okay, what will be the fitment into the role? The person is coming from a break, whether this person will be able to adjust to this kind of a culture, because that person has been an off for some action. So there are multiple questions which runs, and that creates a bit more a line of inquiry in the minds of recruiter. At times, if somebody is insensitive, the other person experiences this as a bias. If somebody is really thought through and put it across, that turns out to a very meaningful conversations, you know. So I know mature hiring managers, they ask people, okay, tell me your story. What did you do during this break? And this turns out to be a very good conversation for a candidate to actually say what she or he did, you know, and then taking a leaf out of those, you know, whether the person will be able to do a fitment or not. But I've seen some very, you know, immature and, you know, very rustic kind of assessments when people just say to the people that, okay, you know, this is a gap. So I think, to answer you very precisely, Harsh, does that exist? Yes, it does exist, but it's a more of a function of questioning the fitment and then eventually looking at, you know, whether this gap is detrimental or not. Uh, can it be reduced? Obviously, and definitely it can be, you know, reduced. And I think it's a more of a sensitization to the hiring teams, to the hiring managers, to look at that. Let's not create another stereotype of candidature of having the.
I have an observation over here. You know, when you said that sensitizing the hiring team and the hiring managers, you know, so somewhere I think there is a need within this spectrum of people who are focused on the hiring aspect of it to drive up the relevance, the importance of life skills. Because you know, now given the times, we are looking at empathy as a key factor. Of course, competencies, as we've always, even during the boot camp, you know, we kind of reiterated the fact that your competencies have to be non-negotiable. You just have to have very, very core competencies, and you know, unmatchable, you know, in terms of competencies. But in terms of when we say life skills, don't we, isn't there a need to drive that aspect as an agenda in the hiring scenario as well, that gives some relevance, some importance to life skills that have been developed? Because like I said, empathy, change management, resilience, adaptability. So you know, a couple of sabbatical scenarios are because the spouse has to move overseas, and you know, the woman has to be on a forced sabbatical because she's going to be the accompanying spouse and all of that. But didn't that lead to her adapting to newer cultures? Didn't that lead to her managing change and coming out resilient through that change? Because when she wants to restart her career, somewhere she's been through that cycle, she's absorbed a lot during that, she's learned cross-cultural learnings, you know, out of it. So just wanted to know, shouldn't that be one of the agendas that should be driven in the hiring space?
Oh,
So,
absolutely. I can't.
okay.
So sorry, Nandini, go ahead, please.
Okay, so I'll just try to kind of bring in some positive aspects to this. First of all, life skill is something that I really, really strongly harp upon. So I always say that please do not specify it as a gap, but specify it as the time frame where you had acquired certain life skills. Think for those incidences that you have managed, try and see what you've learned and what skill is that which you've acquired. So that's one. Coming back to the workplace, when it comes to opening up to hiring people who've taken a break or sabbatical and then returning them back, well, I ascribe it to a mindset issue and definite bias, because I believe those who've taken a break has already acquired certain working experience plus the life skills. Now, the positive side in terms of practice that I have observed being working across industries is that some of the organizations that I've worked for have gone ahead and hired people who were on break without even running an agenda or a hiring drive for the cause. That's one. Second, when we were trying to drive an agenda, it came to light that they have hired, and the feedback that we got in terms of productivity and performance has been worth sharing, because they are very productive, because once they are back to workforce, they really want to prove that they have that fire in them. And retention also, I'm talking about the HR criteria that we need to map when we are pushing those interventions as D&I practitioners. So even the retention rate is much improved compared to the general attrition and retention. So It's mindset, and within the organization that needs to be opened up. So continuous tone from the top and sensitization of recruitment teams and hiring managers definitely goes a long way. But again, you can make change happen by numbers, and diversity and inclusion drives are not just making those numbers. It's basically bringing in a change in the environment where everybody is looked at for equal opportunity and respectful workplace. So that would be my take. Over to you, Manish. Sorry, I stole in.
Thanks, Nandini, thanks for putting a very, very broad canvas and appropriate canvas around this thing, and setting the right context. So, and I can tell you from my experience, Deepika. So there's a two lenses to it. One is the candidate lens. The other one is the organization lens. You talk to anybody who's taken a break, yeah, right, or who has decided to go solo. It's a very bold decision, right? It's a manifestation of a very bold decision. A lot of times there is a very meticulous planning behind that, so there is a prioritization, there is allocation of resources, there is a kind of stakeholder management in the family, in the relative part of it, children, long-term, short-term planning, and a lot of resilience. Any person who has gone through this has consciously broken the identities, what that person is already going through, and building a new identity. So it's a kind of a metamorphosis. It's a very, very taxing process. And you're absolutely right. This is a very exhaustive process where I see, and I've interviewed a lot of people who have taken conscious breaks and go through these kind of experiences. So this is a candidate view. From an organization's view, where I see things missing is a lot of people don't reflect their journeys. So if somebody has done it, if you take a pause and say, okay, I think I was resilient when I took this call, and took that call. I think I was bold enough. So at times we just get carried away with the flow that, either we are, and which is very understandable, either we are fighting the situation, surviving, excelling, bringing the money in, and we tend to move away from the reflection. So I would really encourage everybody who's trying to come back, please sit and do a exhaustive reflection. Build your story, build your USP, build your selling point, and please find a platform to broadcast that story. Right? I think that is equally important, because any reflections which is in the mind, the other person is not able to see it. So, and there are multiple ways to do that, offering pro bono services to startups, creating your own community, and being an evangelist of a particular thought, going back to the education sector and being a champion of a particular concept or a field of, in academia, so if I'm passionate about talent management, please do that, and trust me, the everybody wants to hear right now, what others people are talking about it. So to answer you, Deepika, absolutely yes. It is very important, but what is important is the content, which means in terms of reflection and highlighting in your mind that, yes, I experienced through this. So first realization at yourself, and a bit of a branding and packaging. I think these two have to go together. At times I have been awestruck when I just ask the candidate, okay, why did you took a break? And there's some beautiful stories coming out of it, which actually made me move that, what the hell, what a bold move. I couldn't have done that, So I think it's these are the 2-3 things which I think have created an impact.
Thanks, Manish. You got me smiling there because Harsh, it just was in complete alignment with what we discussed in the bootcamp batches earlier today, and I'm so glad that Providence just reiterated it for us through what you kind of mentioned, Manish, because we, especially when it comes to women, we hugely underplay ourselves, and we really don't know how to write our stories well, especially in the space of gap, especially in the space of career break. Now, if we can introspect and get the highlight points of and I'm sure, and given my experience through the Corporate Diva tribe, that every one of us has a story, has a turning point in our lives. We've just got to kind of firstly ourselves put value to that aspect, and then of course highlight that aspect further on when we look at giving interviews and reaching out to return back to work. So that's certainly something that brought a smile. And on this note, are there any questions, Harsh? Anything that
No, I just want to, so I was doing a webinar on the art of storytelling, and we started a webinar by saying that the shortest distance between two people is a story. And stories really connect, right? So I think, and Manik, I like the point around the whole identity part, right? So it's a point of reflection, and it's also a point of acknowledgement, saying I have now grown into this new different person, right? Sometimes we just don't realize that. Like all of us in the last 3 months, just the fact that we have been working from home and managing these situations which we have never managed in our lives, I have realized that I am much more resilient than I ever thought of myself.
Yeah.
But we don't acknowledge that, right? We don't see that. We just feel that this is our job or we've just done it. But the fact that if you go back and reflect that I've been in the same space of 200, 300 square meters and I've not even moved out of that for the last 3 months, and still everything has been going with precision and clockwork as it was before, it's a great sign that all of us have grown, right? We have learned, but somehow we don't reflect and knowledge, right? So it's a great point. I love the point of identity and storytelling. Yeah.
And the fact that to our audience over here who have been through the boot camp, is that for having organizations to invest into you, you first need to invest into your own selves. Because like in the boot camp also, Harsh mentioned about the fact that there are certain risk factors when organizations are looking at hiring returning career women, and Neerja also emphasized on the fact that you've got to show up, you've got to be there, you've got to be serious about returning, and that's where returnship programs come handy. On that note, we're almost there in terms of concluding this hugely enriching panel discussion, but a quick response question to all three of our panelists here, and we start with Neerja. Neerja, just to conclude, what are the 2 do's and the 2 don'ts that you'd like to share for women wanting to return back?
I think the do's are, as I said, the top ones, and I will second Manish, and I think everyone on this panel will agree, is definitely continue networking and build a personal brand. Because I was going to say that, the demand and supply situation in our country for any demographic is like this. Doesn't matter whether I'm a woman on a break or I'm a senior woman leader, I'm a man, whatever. The demographic is that there is enough and more supply and there is limited demand. So how do you differentiate yourselves and how do people get to know you, right? And that's the storytelling part of it. So building the story and ensuring that you have a personal brand which is usually visible will automatically differentiate you. So network and build a personal brand is definitely a do. The don't is that do not procrastinate, and I say the time is now for anything. Whatever you want to do, start doing it now. You cannot say that there will come a time, however small that action be. So I have been hugely talking to people about even starting to volunteer. Even that's a great opportunity, to restart. And I don't mean volunteering in the sense of going to an NGO or anything like that. That's also a great opportunity. But there are enough and more companies, especially in the startup world, who offer roles as voluntary positions, because they may not be able to hire very senior people into those roles, and they say, okay, fine, it's a 1 month, 2 month voluntary engagement, or you yourself offer your services, like Manish was saying. That does 2 things for you. One is you understand the reality of the world outside. Unless and until you go and get your hands dirty, you don't understand. You are in a cocoon and you won't understand the reality of the world outside. The second is it builds experience. Now you're no longer on a break. You can actually call it as experience of having done a particular role, especially very relevant when you have to transition roles. So don't procrastinate. Don't say no to any opportunity. The time is now. Pick it up and
Nandini, coming to you, your set of 2 do's and 2 don'ts for returning career women.
So be high on curiosity. That will enable you to know the world around, and be resilient. Those are the 2 do's, and don't underplay. And every time is the right time. Just set your time, reset, and just move on.
Fabulous. Manish, to you, your two do's and two don'ts for women who are very serious now on returning back.
Yeah, so I think one which really stands very high on my mind is please do invest in yourself. And I'm not talking about getting more skills, but understanding yourself as a personality. I think this is the time to go back to basics, go through certain assessments for yourself, and try to understand a deep dive into what kind of personality you are. Just being aware about yourself gives a different kind of liberation and confidence in dealing with uncertainty. So there are a lot of psychometrics which you can go through it, find a coach, find a mentor, and try to understand more about yourself. I think that gives a huge a self-propelled energy for somebody to go into enchanted territory. So I think that is one. I think the other points are very relevant points, as been mentioned by Nandini and Neerja in do's. I think from a don'ts perspective, I think very practical layman's advice: don't stick to one plan. Don't get over possessive with one plan only. If you think you're going in a direction, things are not working out in that sector, that industry, with that particular hiring consultant, change the tracks, move, be agile. Try, experiment. And if you are failing, fail fast so that you can just move to a second point. Don't keep on clinging to it, and that's where you are increasing your probability of success by failing fast, technically. So that's how it works. So don't stick to one plan. Be agile, be very objective about things, and don't get distracted by this COVID. I think there are many more crises are going to come, and I'm telling you, all the ladies out there, I think you guys have handled bigger crisis in changing, your locations, getting into a new family, starting a family. So, yeah, I think those have been more taxing than this. So, build your unique story. Every story is a unique story. Invest in that. And I think you will shine for sure.
On that note, Harsh and I are extremely grateful to our panelists as well as our participants for the boot camp. And as we mentioned in the boot camp, what lies next for each one of our participants is our 2-month deep dive program, which pretty much encompasses what our panelists reiterated for when it comes to establishing the differentiating factor of your personal brand, getting a structure, a plan in mind, knowing yourself better, and literally the in and out of what is needed to be getting yourself ready for rejoining work. So, we'll be happy to kind of give you more details on Rediscover the Diva in You, the in-depth 2-month program. And before we sign out, Harsh, last few words from your end. And thank you, panelists, for your time.
No, yes, thank you all of you for spending time today. Very enriching discussion. I have taken enough notes now. I have to go back and digest all the them. But for me, it was a great experience, real learning really, and I hope everybody else we learn from each other really. Right? So thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
All the best
Especially
to
special gratitude to our panelists for your time on a Saturday evening. And there's just been, I've always been writing while communicating about the panel discussion that this is going to be an insightful one. It indeed was very insightful. And thank you for sharing your expertise. I think this was such a beautiful panel that came together, brought in so much of insight, so much of perspective, so much of expertise, and so much for us to go back home and ponder on. So thank you so much. Thank you for your time, and let's all stay safe and healthy.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
all. Bye.
Yeah.